Hey everybody, it is Sunday night and I did not get a chance to do much here in the fish room today, but I did get in here long enough to do a water change here on my Waterfall Tank. So we're going to do a little video tonight. We're going to do a little update on what's been going on in the waterfall here. Not too much going on in the tank itself. I actually don't really want to focus too much on what's been happening in the tank. I want to talk more about the plant growth and that sort of thing, but we'll get to that in a minute. Like I said, there's just a lot to go over with this tank, and then when you actually start looking at my periphery plants and my crab tank down here that's sort of attached to the whole thing, it becomes quite a lot to go over if we're going to cover the whole thing. So, with the tank, I have added a couple of new sculpins this week. One of them did not make it to video. It was a sort of haphazard acquisition. I had thrown my trap back in last time I checked it, and I didn't put any bait in it. I never got around to going back and putting bait in it, and so before all the snows came, I went and collected the trap up, and I took a bucket with me just in case something had inadvertently swum into it, and sure enough it had, and I wound up catching another little sculpin that is now in the tank. So I think I've got 4 sculpins in there now. Not sure about that darter anymore, and I'm not sure about the crayfish. I'm assuming the crayfish probably climbed out and is dried up in the corner of the basement somewhere by now. But my flagfish are doing really well. They get along fine. They get along well with the molly. They get along well with the gourami that's in there. And I'm hoping they, along with the sculpins, will keep my little guppy population in check. And I might add some, some platies or some mollies, some more mollies, something like that. I don't know. I'm enjoying this tank. I really like the way the fish are interacting in there, and I'm okay with it not being a native tank necessarily. If it had some variatus or platies in there, maybe some swordtails swimming around, maybe some cobra guppies or something like that would be really pretty in there. So we'll see. We've got possibilities with that. And then, of course, I've got my little dwarf frogs in there. So with all this small stuff and all this bottom dwelling stuff, I'm not so sure I really want to put another crayfish in there. But again, we'll have to wait and see. That'll be something that'll be, for the springtime, not now anyway. I do think I'm going to add more frogs. I'm really enjoying the frogs in there, and with this big 40-gallon tank, I can easily fit a few more, and so we can have a lot of activity with the frogs in there. And if I get the right mix of males and females, I'll actually get them in the tank singing. Now, I don't know how much we'll be able to hear them over the sound of the waterfall here, but with the frogs in there singing, that's pretty interesting. I've had frogs sing in my tanks before, and it's really neat. It's just sort of quiet chirping sound. It takes you a while to figure out what it is until you zero in on it. And then once you realize what it is, it becomes pretty obvious that it's the frogs in the tank singing. So I'm hoping I can acquire that again, but I'm going to probably need some more frogs. And, like I said, maybe we'll throw some more mollies or platies or something like that in there. There's my little opaline gourami still in there doing well. The red-clawed crab tank is still doing okay. I do want to move that big flat rock that's right there in the middle. That rock actually came out of this tank. I had it sitting in the back over here, and it was kind of like this way. So whether you tried to look through from the front or from the back looking through this way, you basically had that big flat rock blocking the view as it's doing here in the crab tank. So if I removed that, there's a pretty good likelihood we might get to see some of the crabs crawling around in there. As far as I know, none of them have gotten out. I know it looks kind of haphazard there, but there really isn't a way out for those crabs, believe it or not. That is a tank that they can't climb out of, that I know of. They might be more escape artists than I think, but there's no way really for them to get out. The only possible way they would be able to would be by climbing up the wire, and as you can see, I've got that blocked off pretty securely. There's no way they're going to be able to move that or get around it. So that's it. That's their only way out. I know some of this stuff looks like it comes close to the edge, but it doesn't really, and they'd almost have to figure out how to jump from the piece of wood over to the edge. And again, I don't see crabs as being that acrobatic. I can see them being climbers, but not, jumpers and twirlers and all that sort of thing that they would need to do to get out of there from that. So probably still have all the crabs in there, but they're probably all just hiding right now. As far as the superficial stuff we've got here, the peripheral stuff, I brought down my daylily, or one of my daylilies. We have a million of these around the house. But I brought one of them down. That's this big green plant here. I'm sorry, I'm calling it a daylily. Peace lily. Peace lily is also what is known as a Brazilian sword if you buy them for your fish tank. So I could actually cut that up and divide that one single planter up there and have enough Brazilian swords to fill up every fish tank I've got. But that's what that is. That's a peace lily or Brazilian sword, and I just have it in a planter sitting on the floor next to the tanks. This is a begonia. I don't know if it's begonia rex or not, but it is a begonia. This, of course, is my lemon tree. In another 3 or 4 years, hopefully, we will get some lemons on that. My water sprite that's floating is doing well. You can see some shoots coming up out of the water. We're starting to get some new growth on that. I was beginning to worry. I don't have any nitrates or anything in this tank. I didn't check the nitrates tonight, but I did check the TDS. And the TDS in this tank is actually lower than my tap water. So the plants and everything that are in here are actually removing stuff from the water. This water has less TDS in it than my tap water now. So I'm really surprised that floating water sprite is growing at all. There's really no nutrients, or well, I guess maybe as the ammonia is being produced and the nitrate is being produced, maybe trace amounts of that are available, and that's what the plants are eating up. I don't know, but it's doing well any way you slice it. Again, I was worried that none of the water sprite was going to do well. It was all seeming to just sort of melt away, and it's just because there's nothing in the water. There's no hardness, there's no nutrients, there's no nothing. So yay for the water sprite. We're getting some, you know, like I said, that's some pretty significant growth. I'm really happy about that. And then, of course, if we look underneath, we can see all that root growth. Looks fantastic, too. I love seeing that root hang down into the water like that. Over to this side of the tank, we have another one of these same begonias. We have this, which I know is Begonia rex. I do not know the cultivar. I've looked and looked and looked, and there's so many that are so similar, but I don't know the actual cultivar of this. I have been asked about it, and for good reason. It's absolutely beautiful, and this camera is not really doing it justice. This has almost like an iridescent kind of pearly sheen to it when you see it in person. Really, really pretty begonia. And then, of course, my little planter full of creeping Jenny is doing well there. So with my actual waterfall area, the growth I'm getting off of this stuff up here is just fantastic. It's not, you know, beyond what I was expecting, but it's everything I was hoping for, and maybe even a little more. Again, thanks to this amazing little LED light there. Those Cree X lamps are awesome when it comes to grow lights. So my philodendron here that I was hoping was going to grow and trail down and everything's not doing a lot of trailing. It's doing a lot of growing, and that's probably because it's getting so much light. These are typically you know, kept in the house or an office, and sort of the, you know, the standard fluorescent overhead lighting is generally all these plants ever get. And while they can do okay on that, they tend to be very long and leggy, and, you know, they got these long trailing tendrils. When you've got them in this area, and I'll grant you only this edge here has the high lighting on it, but that's got enough lighting on it that you can see how dense and compact the growth on this thing is. I mean, it's amazing in there. So I'm having a little bit of trouble getting any trailing growth to happen. It's all just sort of bunching up at the top in one huge mass. So we'll see how that goes. My creeping Jenny is kind of the same way. You can see it's creeping up. It's going up this way and climbing up onto the log, which is fine. I'm not unhappy about that. I want it to grow as naturally as possible. But we got some bugleweed. That's what this stuff here is. That's the ajuta or bugleweed. And I'm finally starting to get a little bit of intermingling here where you've got the creeping Jenny and I've got some dead nettles, and they're starting to grow through the leaves of the philodendron. So I'm enjoying that. We've got more of the bugleweed, and you can see how that's all just new growth sticking right off the front of that. More philodendron over here, of course. I did have a planter up here that had some of the dead nettles in it, and the idea was they were going to hang over and cover this whole sort of side here, and in particular cover this sort of jagged broken end of that piece of wood. And unfortunately it died off. The main body of the plant gets like no light back, you know, up and over the top over there, so the trailing stuff just wasn't enough to sustain it. And I honestly, you know, being up above my head like that, I couldn't really see it. I just overwatered the hell out of it a couple of times, and that probably didn't help either. So we'll have to see what we do with that. That corner definitely needs something at this point, but I just don't know what it's going to get. I don't really want to do more of all of the same stuff I've got in here already. But you can see how vigorous the growth on the Creeping Jenny is. I was expecting that. What's really surprising me is the moss. The moss is growing like I've never seen moss grow before, and this is an interesting example of it right here. This is all one big sheet of moss I peeled up out of the yard and just flopped over this. It's just kind of hanging on that. Look at down here where, and this piece right here is a separate little piece that's just sticking on a piece of wood sticking up, and again I just plopped a piece of moss over it. But look down here where the water gets on it, and then you can see as it gets drier and drier and drier, look at what it looks like up there versus down at the bottom. And it's just amazing how much growth I'm getting off of that. That looks absolutely fantastic. That moss looks good. But then when we start getting down here and we start looking at this moss, this stuff just looks incredible. I've never seen moss grow so tall. It almost looks like grass growing. It's so tall and lush. I've got lots of new growth coming in on my Java fern back there. I've got some new shoots coming up from my, you can see this one right here. This is a new Anubias. So I got a couple of Anubias rhizomes in there, and they're starting to poke up. My water sprite that is sort of tucked in under here and gives us this sort of hanging effect that's now dying off is starting to grow out up here. We've got all that new growth coming out. I did have one spot right here where you could still see the rubber sticking through, and I just stuck a piece of moss right there, and it stayed, and it's growing. And again, look at this moss. Just look how thick and lush this stuff is. I just can't get over it. And then I got bits of grass and all kind of little weeds that were down in the moss when I brought it inside, and they're all starting to grow. And then over on this side, we've got the one little hosta that I put in here already, and I think we've got probably some small hosta tubers, bulbs, not sure what you'd call it. I guess it would be a tuber for a hosta. I might have a couple of them in there that might pop up, but I know I've got about 15 or 20 little snowdrops. I went out in the yard the other day and I found some snowdrops down on the front hill that were on the north side of, on the south side of a tree where they actually got a little bit of sun and the ground was warm enough that I could see a few snowdrops coming up. I found a clump of them, and so we're going to have some snowdrops coming up. Now I'm really excited about that. I can't wait to see some little white bell, springtimey flowers coming up in here. One of my viewers also sent me some, I can't even think of what they are now, but it's a really early spring flower. I think I even threw the packaging away now. That's going to drive me crazy trying to remember what they are. Anyway, I don't have a lot of hope for them. The bulbs seemed really desiccated, but I put them in there anyway. There's no real soil to plant them in here, but I just tucked them down into the wet, mossy areas, and then, of course, behind this piece of wood is just sort of wet moss back there, too, and I threw a bunch of them back there. You can even see right here I've got a bulb is coming up, and that, of course, is probably one of the snowdrops I put in there. So I'm really looking forward to that and seeing all of them come up. And I also was interested to see that where a while ago I was concerned about whether or not this stuff was going to sort of attach and grow to it, or was this moss just going to slide off if I bumped into it or whatever? Was it just going to sit on it? I'm really surprised at how firmly this stuff is just growing right to the surface of that. Everything is almost attached to it. It's going to destroy it in the long run, but as I've said since day one, this is always going to be a temporary thing. This was just a fun project. You can almost think of this as a prototype. This was just me playing around with some ideas, and I got some really good ideas, and I worked out some really cool ways of doing some stuff. But when I redo another one of these, if I ever do, or if I do something similar or whatever, same basic principles, I would do it very differently. I wouldn't use the same method that I did to put this whole thing together. But I learned a lot by doing it, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And again, it's, you know, it never was meant to last forever. And I've already got leaks in it. I've had leaks since the beginning. I've just learned to deal with them. We'll go back in the back and we'll have a look at that leak in just a minute. But the plants that are growing to it and attaching to it, eventually those roots will work their ways down into the little nooks and crannies, and they'll continue to work their way right through that soft rubber. And once the root has gone through that soft rubber and is growing sort of into the medium, you know, and sort of into the foam that is what makes up the basis of this waterfall area, you know, that's going to be holes in it. You know, roots growing through stuff pokes holes in it. And that's going to happen. So this is going to destroy itself as it grows in. But that's okay. It's going to be a fascinating process to watch, and it's going to be a lot of fun to watch it grow in. So if we come around back, which is, I'll grant you, a little messy at the moment, I have a leak that only occurs sometimes. Oh, I also forgot to mention I put in new lighting. If you haven't seen that video yet, I did install new lighting, and it allows me, when I come around back here, to actually have a nice brightly lit tank, and we can see in there a lot better than we used to be able to. And there's a lot more swimming around room back here. There's a lot more visual going on, you know, visually going on in the front of the tank. A lot of wood and a lot of rocks and plants and all that kind of stuff, but you don't get to see a lot of swimming around and a lot of the animal activity from the front of the tank. But if you come back here and you sit on the floor, or if you sit on a bucket, then you get to see all of this, and it's a very different looking tank. It's just a different feel about it altogether. So I'm really enjoying the new lighting back here. But as far as the leaking goes, I think it leaks from an area that only gets wet when the water's flowing really vigorously. So today, for example, I changed the filter and we've got a lot more vigorous water flow. So while the leaking had stopped and had basically gotten to where it was just sort of wet, now we're starting to get water forming again, and I guarantee by the time I come down in the morning it's going to be dripping. And what I do, basically, I've just sort of accepted that this is going to happen. And so as it drips onto this deck back here, the wick effect, the capillary action, pulls the water into my paper towel, and then that simply drips it in here. And you can even see there's still a little water in there from the last time I did a water change. So before this pan is even close to needing to be emptied, again, you can see that water, I just left it in there from the last time. So it doesn't leak much, but it does leak. And one of the reasons, you know, again, I'm not going to worry about it. It's something I can deal with. It only happens for about the first 24 to 36 hours after I do some filter maintenance, you know, and I get that water really vigorously flowing again. I'll have some dripping going on tomorrow, but by this time tomorrow night, that dripping will have either stopped completely or almost completely stopped, and it just won't be anything I need to worry about. I do also keep a bucket over here just in case. I have had the weeping water come across here and onto this pole, and if it weeps down, it can come off on this side rather than this side, and in that case it actually drips right off this point, and that's why I've got that bucket sitting there too. So again, if I do, you know, I'm not going to have a catastrophic failure overnight. I'm not going to come down and find an empty 40-gallon tank and the filter whirring away and it's just pumping water all over my basement floor. Worst case scenario, I'll come down and it'll be weeping and dripping a little more than I expected it to be, and then I might have to say, okay, you know, now we need to do something and address this. But, you know, until that point, this is how I'm going to deal with it. Again, it's probably going to be gone by the end of next summer, and I'll be working on my next project anyway. So this is it. We're just dealing with it. When I do water changes, I have to deal with a day of a little bit of a dripping, weeping leak, and then after that, we're back to not having to worry about anything, and it's good to go again. So that is, I'm getting too old for this. That is the end of this video. We'll come back around front, have a look at the whole thing from standing back at a little bit of a distance. This is what you see when you walk in the door. And I will throw you a little teaser. It's not going to be much of a video, but I will shoot a video about my T-bar tank. I noticed again today that the tank is very, very warm, despite the fact that I turned the filter down recently. So not sure what's going on in the T-bar tank. I'll have a video about that coming up in the next day or two. So make sure you're subscribed and you won't miss any of that or anything else I've got going on. So thanks for watching this. A little longer than I was expecting, but as I said, there's a lot to take in and a lot to go over with all this tank. So thanks for watching it. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you real soon on the next one.